Welcome to the Green Brief Podcast. I'm your host, Mason Payne, and we are back. We took a long break after we got started last year, not by choice, out of necessity due to the absolute insanity the past few months have been, navigating OBN renewal season and the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority's new portal launch. It's been quite a ride. And I just simply didn't have the time to plan, produce, and pump out new episodes. During that time, I also had to rethink how I'll approach the Green Brief to get it back going again. I'll be moving away from the guest interview model and into more of a news brief style show with the occasional interview edition when it's relevant. From here forward, every month, hopefully, we'll drop one episode that briefs the industry on its current events. I feel this format will help us stay consistent and get the most critically important content out each month and hopefully inspire more conversations than I could ever host. This month, I want to focus on Governor Kevin Stitt's call to bring the medical marijuana industry in Oklahoma to an end via getting it back onto the ballot. Now, this idea was first floated during his State of the State address, but he's since been on a mini media tour repeating the same main talking points from his address. Here are some of the quotes I want to run through and respond to. I'm just going to read them first, and then I'll go through one by one and dive in a little deeper. Kevin Stitt said the following quotes. One of the greatest threats to public safety is Oklahoma's out-of-control medical marijuana program. Out-of-state liberal activists preyed on the compassionate nature of Oklahomans. Then it opened up a Pandora's box. Now we have more dispensaries than we do pharmacies. Think about that. These storefronts hide an industry that enables cartel activity, human trafficking, and foreign influence in our state. Adria Berry at the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority and Donnie Anderson at the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics have done an incredible job to hold back the tide of illegal activity. This industry is plagued by criminal activity and bad actors, making it nearly impossible to rein in. And finally, knowing what we know now, it's time to let Oklahomans bring safety and sanity back to their neighborhoods. Send the marijuana issue back to the vote of the people, and let's shut it down. Then basically every member of the Oklahoma House on the screen stood up and clapped for an entire minute, which was absurd. And I'll go through why. First, the idea that marijuana, medical marijuana, is one of the greatest threats to public safety in Oklahoma. You know, the entire purpose of a regulated medical marijuana program is to create a legal, safe, accountable supply chain. Before State Question 788 passed, Oklahomans who relied on cannabis were buying it from unregulated, untaxed, untracked black market sources with zero quality control, zero consumer protections, zero visibility. And that's what they'd go back to doing if the medical program gets shut down. What's happened in Oklahoma is the result of a legal market being under-resourced and under-enforced, which is a regulatory and legislative failure. It's not an indictment of legal operators within a legal program. If you take away the legal market, you have approximately 315,000 Oklahomans who are currently licensed medical marijuana patients that immediately go back to the black market or pharmaceuticals with lethal thresholds. These are people managing chronic pain, PTSD, epilepsy, cancer, multiple sclerosis, anxiety disorders. These are veterans managing dozens of other conditions, many of whom came to cannabis after the conventional medical system failed them. And there's not a single confirmed fatal overdose attributable to cannabis alone and the recorded history of its use. The pharmaceutical alternatives being implied as what would be the replacements, opioids, benzos, sleep aids, these carry black box warnings. They have documented addiction profiles and withdrawal symptoms that can be fatal. And for a chronic pain patient who found cannabis after opioids maybe nearly killed them or destroyed their liver or hollowed out their family, the governor's proposal is a forced return to the thing that has already failed them. If you shut this program down, you take away safe access to 315,000 Oklahomans' medicine. And the exact conditions Governor Stitt claims to be fighting against, he would be creating them deliberately for all of Oklahoma, all 315,000 Oklahoma medical marijuana patients at the least. And next he says, out-of-state liberal activists preyed on the compassionate nature of Oklahomans. Now, State Question 788, which legalized medical marijuana, was a citizen-led initiative petition. The state question was written by 5 Oklahomans who formed a nonprofit called Oklahomans for Health. The campaign was entirely grassroots, is made up of hundreds of real Oklahomans from all walks of life. And State Question 788 passed with 57% of the vote in the same election cycle that Donald Trump carried 65% of the state. So there weren't out-of-state liberal activists appealing to your grandpa's sweetheart. We know how news feeds work. Medical marijuana passed in Oklahoma because there were conservative Oklahomans, liberal Oklahomans, Oklahomans from the cities, rural Oklahomans, veterans, farmers, all kinds of people who made a clear, informed, sovereign decision. And to gaslight people and weave some story about how the citizens who made that decision into some bless your heart, you were too dumb to know the truth when you voted statement is frankly insulting. Especially when you know the opposition to State Question 788 outspent the support by more than 4 to 1, $1.2 million to 285,000, with an out-of-state company among the top donors on the opposition side. And the grassroots campaign, they slept in tents, they gathered signatures by hand, and they won anyway. So if the governor wants to have a conversation about outside money distorting Oklahoma's political processes, a conversation doesn't start where he thinks it does. Oklahomans wanted medical marijuana. They weren't in charge of the regulatory rollout or enforcement responsibilities that came next, and they shouldn't be charged to relitigate the issue over it either. And so everything needs to be put back into right relation with reality. Because next he says that then it opened up Pandora's box. It, like it's just legalization itself. And I want to stop there before I continue with the rest of this quote, because I've been submitting commercial business license applications to OMA and OBNDD since 2020. I've submitted probably close to 1,000 of them at this point between transfers, renewals, and new applications back in the heyday. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, medical marijuana legalization didn't open Pandora's box. What opened Pandora's box was the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority and the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics approving over 13,600 applications with little to no scrutiny, and then providing zero meaningful regulatory enforcement for the better part of 3 years. That's what opened the box. Politico even published an article saying all you needed to start a marijuana business in Oklahoma was $2,500 in a dream, or a credit card in a dream. And regulators often use this example of how there were pamphlets in foreign languages saying, come to Oklahoma, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3, as if they don't realize that was their reputation preceding them. So wide open and careless that they garnered worldwide attention, apparently, to make this the problem that it is today. The regulatory agencies were not blindsided by this. They were the reason for it. OMA and OB&DD, the legislature, they set the conditions. They watched the market explode. They collected the fees on every application. And now they're standing by a governor who is using the consequences of their own permissiveness as a justification to eliminate the program entirely. But the legal industry should not be accountable to what the state should have been accountable themselves all along. They shouldn't be subject to blanket statements because they have nothing to do with it. He continues and he says, now we have more dispensaries than we do pharmacies. Think about that. I've thought about that. My father was a pharmacist, owned an Oklahoma pharmacy my whole life. And he wants you to think that this statement is alarming. But the pharmacy industry isn't the shining example of a healthy, accessible marketplace, that he wishes it was for the point to land. He's comparing Oklahoma's dispensaries to an industry that's been almost entirely consumed by 3 corporations. Corporate consolidation has gutted independent pharmacies across the country. The reason there aren't that many pharmacies is because locally owned small businesses got wiped out by big box chains. The vertical chain of an insurance company, pharmacy and pharmacy benefit managers, is sometimes owned by the exact same corporation. And Stitt should know this because in 2023, the Oklahoma Attorney General's office was investigating how in the world Oklahoma pharmacies couldn't even afford to dispense medications. And that office stated, quote, that the top 6 pharmacy benefit managers in the nation controlled 96% of all the medication volume that's out there. And so what happened with Oklahoma's medical marijuana industry boom is completely different. It represents a completely different spectrum of a marketplace. The doors opened and thousands of small business owners jumped in and they tried it out. Our current license numbers are largely a result of entrepreneurs, entrepreneurship, not limited by corporate takeover, which is exactly how the program was designed to function. And the free market is doing its thing. We've seen over 8,000 cannabis businesses exit this market in the past few years. The market is naturally consolidating around operators who are doing it right and doing everything they can to survive. Now, the free market is correcting itself. It's making a statement about the pharmaceutical industry too. Research published in the journal Plus One in 2022 showed that the pharmaceutical industry experiences an average market loss of nearly $10 billion per marijuana legalization event. And that number should tell Stitt how many Americans, how many Oklahomans are choosing medical marijuana over pharmaceutical drugs. And you either believe in the free market or you don't. You can't spend 30 years championing deregulation and small business and then stand up and complain that too many Oklahomans started businesses when you don't like the product. You got to pick a lane. The next statement is maybe the most dangerous because it implicates licensed Oklahoma businesses with criminal enterprises, and that conflation is reckless. He says, Quote, these storefronts hide an industry that enables cartel activity, human trafficking, and foreign influence in our state. I don't know how else to say this. Human traffickers are not medical marijuana dispensaries. Dispensaries enable people to access legal medical marijuana. These storefronts undergo regular agency inspections. They're under strict seed to sale tracking monitoring. They submit annual background checks. They go through annual OB&DD and OMA renewal application processes. They enable people to access medical marijuana legally. If there are licensed businesses engaging in these heinous activities at scale, it's OMA and OB&DD who have enabled them to hide within a legal program. The state would have collected their fees. In some cases, they would have interviewed them, handed them a license, and sent them on their way. The cases being cited are real. I'm not going to say that they're not. They're serious, and they absolutely merit aggressive law enforcement attention, but they're isolated incidents. They're largely traced back to the same network of actors, and they represent a vanishingly small fraction of the thousands of licensed businesses operating legally in the state. So what the governor is doing is he's taking a defined, documented set of criminal cases, and he's projecting that criminality onto an entire industry of licensed Oklahoma businesses. It's crazy. It's guilt by association governance, and it has no place in honest conversation about regulation. I mean, these are felonies regardless of the presence of marijuana. They're felonies before State Question 788 passed. They have no real legal or casual relationship to medical marijuana legalization. They're crimes. They're crimes committed by criminal organizations that identified a regulatory gap and exploited it. And that regulatory gap was created and maintained by the state's own licensing agencies over a period of years. But I get it, I get it. It is considerably easier to stand before a legislature and condemn an entire industry than it is to stand before that same legislature and account for how your own agencies failed. But one of those things is honest and one of them is not. And if you actually want to combat cartel infiltration and illegal grows and all that, a robust, well-funded legal market is your best tool. It shrinks the black market base. It creates a legal workforce with a stake in reporting illegal competition, and it generates tax revenue that can fund enforcement. Shutting down a legal market, it hands all the distribution, the entire supply of marijuana back to the black market. It makes absolutely no sense to say black market activity is out of control and then present the solution as recriminalizing marijuana, which would give 100% of marijuana access control back to the black market. But Stitt continues to drive this point. This industry is plagued by criminal activity and bad actors, making it nearly impossible to rein in, he says. Every industry has bad actors. Banking, energy, construction, healthcare, the pharmaceutical supply chain. This is more rationale for enforcement. But I'm beginning to think that it's deeper, that it's ideological, because everything to do with marijuana in Oklahoma has this history of being criminal activity. Not long ago in the state, you could not possess any amount of cannabis without risking becoming a felon. Second possession of any amount was a felony. And that history doesn't just disappear overnight. And I'm beginning to think that Kevin Stitt, Attorney General Drummond, and the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics have just never truly reconciled themselves with the fact that Oklahomans changed that. I don't think that they've evolved their long-held positions at all. So what happens is every legal operator, every legitimate small business owner, every compliant, licensed marijuana facility, they're all still viewed through that old lens. Everything connected to cannabis is just inherently criminal and bad in their minds, I think, regardless of what the voters decided, regardless of what the law says. I mean, that's got to be why OBN and Drummond brag about shutting down 9,000 illegal grows, 9,000 illegal grows, when the people who work on the other side of this industry know that that's not true. We know that about 8,000 at least didn't continue or couldn't continue because they were regulated out of the industry via certificate of occupancy requirements, duplicate licensing laws, or tiered fees that made a $2,500 license $80,000 to renew overnight. So it's not just a philosophical or an ideological problem. It becomes a practical one too, because OBN is directly involved in licensing and regulatory process of this industry. And Drummond is the AG running for governor. He recently also said, quote, with a background in law enforcement, I'd like to see it gone, talking about marijuana. So the folks responsible for enforcing drug laws are simultaneously helping to regulate a legal market that it appears they fundamentally believe should not exist. That tension produces exactly what we got: a chaotic, under-enforced environment that bad actors exploited. But here's what I really want to keep coming back to, is that in every single argument Stitt makes for shutting this industry down, the cartels, the trafficking, the foreign influence, the bad actors, the fault lies with the licensing agencies and regulators. His administration was on the watch the whole time. These are not unlicensed operations he's describing, even though the vast majority of enforcement actions have been on unlicensed operations, which makes them illegal in the first place. These are people he's describing who went through the application process, who submitted paperwork, who paid fees, who passed or should have passed background checks reviewed by the state. These are facilities that were monitored, inspected, or at least should have been. And he says that Adria Berry at the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority and Donnie Anderson at the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics have done an incredible job to hold back the tide of illegal activity. You can't tell us the industry is crawling with cartel activity and human traffickers in one breath and then praise Adria Berry and Donnie Anderson in the next. It doesn't make sense. If those criminals still exist inside the licensed market, your people let them in and are letting them stay. And it's absolute bullshit to stand up and ask Oklahomans to shut down a voter-approved industry to cover for it. Over the past few years, OMA and OBNDD have absolutely ramped up enforcement actions, and the legislature has introduced laws that have kneecapped the industry severely. Kevin Stitt signed a licensing moratorium that keeps the industry from expanding through 2026, August of 2026. And there's another bill going through the legislature now that would extend the moratorium through 2028 and cap the total number of licenses. No new dispensary, processor, or grower licenses can be issued, and they haven't been able to be for 2 years, 3 years now almost. And we've seen the number of licensed businesses reduced by 74% from its peak. 16,500 businesses down to 4,350. And again, I want to note that most of these businesses went out due to regulation. They weren't illegal operators. Maybe 1,000 have been connected to the illegal activity described. We're going to find out with an open records request so that these numbers can't be weaponized anymore. But the main point is that the market is contracting. The regulatory environment has tightened substantially. The legislature has tools in place specifically to prevent the conditions the governor described from recurring. So there's no issue that a full repeal would solve that existing and pending regulatory architecture is not already addressing. You only create the problems that you want to avoid with a repeal. It's the only outcome. A vote to repeal the medical marijuana program is a vote to hand the cartels, the black market operators, back the entire market. Every single patient, 315,000 Oklahomans who cannot access a legal dispensary, becomes a potential black market customer overnight with exposure to the variety of other drugs available on that market. What the governor is proposing is genuinely unprecedented. No state has ever repealed their medical marijuana program when it's the only access option. I think most people hear Kevin Stitt and assume it's political theater. Oh, he's on his way out. But I want to be direct about why it is not that. And it's just consider how State Question 788 passed in the first place. 5 Oklahomans started a nonprofit. They wrote a petition. They gathered enough signatures to get it on the ballot. And then 57% of Oklahoma voted yes for it. That's the entire mechanism. It's not that complicated, and it's not out of reach. Anybody could do it. The Speaker of the House doesn't have to agree that it's a good option, so it doesn't really matter what they've countered in the legislature. It just signals that they themselves won't undo the will of the people. But no one in the legislature has to agree that it's right. That same process that gave Oklahomans access to medical marijuana is the same process that could be used to take it away. And we have the sitting governor actively campaigning for that. We have the attorney general on record with the exact same position. And these aren't fringe voices. These are top elected officials in Oklahoma, and they are publicly, explicitly pursuing that outcome, or at least they think it's ideal, personally. And beyond the patients, you're talking about the potential elimination of thousands of locally owned Oklahoma small businesses. Operators who entered a legal market, went through every required process, invested everything they had, and built something real in the industry that employs them, and the tax revenue that the state collects from them. If you're a patient, a business owner, an employee, or just an Oklahoman who believes that the voters of this state deserve to have their decisions respected, pay attention to what's being built right now around this at the top levels of the state government and take it seriously. And if none of this applies to you, if you've got no connection to this industry, no personal stake in medical marijuana, just consider this, that the same administration pushing to overturn a voter-approved program has also made moves in recent legislative sessions to terminate the initiative petition process itself. The initiative petition is the mechanism by which citizens bypass a legislature that won't act on their behalf. It's one of the last direct democracy tools available to ordinary people in the state. And the fact that this administration has looked at that tool and decided it needs to be harder to use tells you everything about how they view the relationship between the government and the people it represents. The core of all of this is a very simple belief on their part that Oklahomans cannot be trusted to make informed decisions for themselves. That voters are susceptible to misinformation and they're too easily misled, and they need to be protected from their own choices at the ballot box. You do not have to support medical marijuana to find that position alarming. You just have to believe that the people of this state are capable of deciding things for themselves. I encourage you to be louder than the opposition right now. 788 opposition raised 4 times the amount of money as support, and they're still trying to undo it 7 years later. And that's proof the biggest bullies don't always win the fight. There lies my hope. Thank you for listening to this important episode of the Green Brief podcast. We'll be back more regularly with an episode planned for each month. With the next episode, we'll take a look at the potency caps and some other concerning legislation moving down the pipeline in the legislature. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share this content if you think it's as important as I do, and I hope you keep tuning in. You've been briefed.